Fourth book in our little four-part book review series is called Tiny Habits, and it's by BJ Fogg, and he says, Why Starting Small Makes Lasting Change Easy. Well, I saw this on the bookshelf and went, you know what, that just makes logical and just intuitive sense to me. And so I picked it up and started reading it. So a little bit about the author. He is the founder of the Stanford Behavior Design Lab, which he has directed, and he researches there. He's been there for over 20 years, and he's earned three graduate degrees, including a master in English from the Brigham Young University. And he was focused on linguistics and rhetoric. And I will just caution you that he is very verbose, and the book is there's a lot of words. The font's very small, so not for the faint of heart. But it is really, if you can distill the key takeaways, which is why I'm here to help you do that, it is definitely a book that I recommend you have a look at. So he's developed this approach to changing your life through tiny habits, and it's a methodology which is really quite a breakthrough approach, showing how small daily routines can lead to significant lasting habit change and change on a big scale. So a couple of the other authors that we reviewed have also spoken about how important or how powerful it is to start with something small that you can do and persist with that over time to create significant and impactful change in your life. I liked his model. He talks about the BMAP formula for behavior, where he talks about behavior change that occurs when three things happen. When we are motivated for the change, when we have the ability to make the change, and we have a trigger. So, in other words, you're going to need to want to do it, you will need to be able to do it, and very importantly, you need to be reminded to do it. Very often when we try to break habits, we just keep forgetting because we're in such a loop of doing the old thing, we have to be reminded to do the new thing. So it's one thing to be able to do it and to want to do it, but if you forget to do it, it's never going to happen. So a nice little three-part model there that he's sort of succinctly described. So then we step into the Tiny Habits method, which he has got a little acronym there, ABC, A for anchor, B for behavior, and C for celebration. So you have an anchor, which is the thing that reminds you to do the behavior. You then have the behavior, and then you celebrate the fact that you've done that. And I'll talk a little bit later about why celebration is important. So he talks about pairing a new tiny behavior after an existing anchor habit and then immediately celebrate the success. And he constantly refers to this ABC that he has employed in his personal life, which is every time he has a pee, he does 10 push-ups. So too much information, but you get the idea. He's reminded to do push-ups because he's going for a pee, which is something he has to do. So if you link by linking those two things together, he's not going to forget to do his push-ups. I think there's probably better examples we can give, like putting your medication next to your toothbrush, because you're going to brush your teeth every morning, and that way you won't forget to take your medication. Things like that. So you get it, ABC, anchor, behavior, and celebration. Thirdly, and this is very powerful, the importance of building momentum. So his idea is that by starting with a really tiny habit, you start to feel good about yourself. It's easy. You can do it. You're practicing it a lot. And through this wonderful combination of factors, it's easy. You can do it. It doesn't stress you out. You start feeling good about it. You do it again. You do it again. You do it again. Very quickly, that behavior cycle becomes entrenched, and then you can start to expand. So the idea that you get up and you want to start running, and all you do is you just run 5 minutes. That's it. You can do that. That's easy. And you do that and you start to feel good. And 5 minutes starts to become 10, becomes 20, becomes 30. Soon you're running 5Ks. And that's all started because you just took that tiny step to run 5 minutes every day. So you can see how that can snowball. Great. So let's talk about celebrating, my favorite topic. He talks about the importance of celebrating as a way to entrench those habits, because positive emotion creates repeat behavior. And remember, habits are all about repetition. So if we enjoy doing the thing, we're going to repeat it. We're going to do it as much as possible. So the more we celebrate or reward, the more we start to hardwire those habits into the brain. And I love his quote in this book. He said, emotions, not fairy dust, creates habits. And he talks about that a lot. I mean, if you think about some of the habits that you've carried over from childhood, they're often in relation to like really great childhood memories that you have, having that popcorn at the movies or having that pie at the footy. You remember doing that as a kid with your parents, and now as an adult, you're still doing those same things because it takes you back to those happy days. So we can see how powerful using emotion is when it comes to changing our habits. So then there's no surprise then that if you are doing something if you're creating a bad habit, if you have a bad habit that you want to change, then using emotion to shift that habit is probably the only way that you're going to do that. Success comes from embracing positive emotions and compassion. We don't want to be beating ourselves up. We want to avoid the guilt of shame of perhaps starting a new diet and then quitting by 12 o'clock on a Monday lunchtime because it's just too hard. By starting with something small, we can achieve that. We feel good about ourselves. We have that positive emotion, and that reinforces the habit, so we keep doing the same thing. Guilt and shame and beating yourself will only hinder your progress, and we don't want that. I don't want that for you. So once we understand the power of tiny habits and rewards, he talks about actually bundling them together. So taking a constellation of tiny habits and bringing them together to create a bigger and more significant change. So he talks about scale by adding small interconnected behaviors that compound to create a bigger impact. So rather than overhauling absolutely everything, look at some things that you can group together to create a bigger impact. Like, for example, exercising or just moving. When we exercise, we not only are moving our body and we feel good about that, but then we're probably going to be a little more conscious about how we eat, or we're probably going to make sure we get to bed early so we can get up and make the gym class in the morning. So he talks about constellation of tiny habits, but we could probably also link that back to what we've learned about keystone habits, picking the one thing that's going to trigger and impact other parts of your life. My daughter, when she was in year 12, found that she just could not study at home. She found it very, very difficult. There were too many distractions, and she would go to the state library and study there. And then she would often use that opportunity to meet up with a friend in the city and have a coffee. So she was getting out of the house. She was getting her studying done in an environment that was supporting her to do that. And then she was rewarding herself at the end by catching up with a friend. And that really worked. Instead of her beating herself up because she was at home and she couldn't concentrate and she was just feeling terrible about the fact that she wasn't studying, she found another way to link some tiny habits together for a much bigger impact. Now, I hope you're all listening to me. Willpower is a myth. Don't think that willpower alone is going to get you and deliver the change impact over the long term that a habit will. It just will not. Think of willpower like holding some heavy weights in your hand. You can hold them for a while, but eventually you will fatigue, you will get tired, and you will have to put those weights down. And willpower is no different. So willpower helps you initially while you are practicing that habit, but eventually the willpower will fade, and you have to make sure that that habit is entrenched at that point. So bad habits will stem from poor prompts and motivation gaps. So make sure that you get that habit practice in while the willpower is there to sustain you, so that once the willpower fades, the habit is there and you're off and running. So willpower is, let's say it's necessary, but it is not sufficient. Willpower gets you started, but habits get you going, keep you going. You understand the idea. So he talks also a lot about prompts. And again, we have to remember that a lot of our habits are unconscious. So we need to be reminded of our habits. We need to be reminded that we need to change them. So he talks about anchors, things that will remind you of your habit. Or he also talks about context. So we are triggered to do certain things in certain situations. So, for example, when I get up in the morning and I go for a walk, I walk past 10 coffee shops. And if I'm trying to quit the habit of having a morning coffee, I need to not go down that street because there are 10 coffee shops on that street. Simple thing. Just change the way you walk so that you don't have that prompt that's triggering that craving all the time. You're just avoiding it altogether. So, the same way that your environment has tricked you into creating the habit, you're going to use the same trick again to trick yourself out of the bad habit. So, we're just flipping it on its head. He also has a golden behavior rule, much like James Clear did. And he talks about golden behaviors. And he refers to golden behaviors are things that are impactful, they're wanted, and they are doable. And he says, choose, if you're wanting to create habits in your life, choose habits that you aspire to, that you are motivated for, and that you can perform even on your worst day. So I guess what he's saying is choose your habits wisely. We'd rather pick a few things that we could do well than try to do everything and just become overwhelmed and quit and give up and feel terrible about ourselves. And finally, the sort of 10th point I want to leave you with was, if you do have a bad habit that you are battling with, try to untangle it step by step. So start off by looking at what's prompting you into that bad habit. You walk into, you come home after a hard day and you are wanting to grab that glass of wine. So what's prompting you to do that? Because you've got the wine in the fridge, because the first thing you do is you go to start making dinner and you grab a glass of wine. So maybe change that routine so that those prompts aren't there to trigger that bad habit. And then scale down the response and replace it gradually. So don't yank it all out forcibly because you know that that's not going to work. So going back to this idea of a tiny habit, what's a tiny thing that you can do to start you off in the direction of changing that habit, something that you can do consistently, that you're going to feel good about yourself and that you can practice a lot so that you can take on the next habit and the next habit until you've eliminated that bad habit altogether. So it's really great, and he gives a lot of really, really cool examples. It is a very long book to read, and the font is very small. So I think this is one that if you could find sort of a Prayseed version, or as I've just done, given you the top 10 takeaways, it's definitely something that you want in your arsenal when you are looking to change your life by starting with small things that you can do every day.